Thank you, Gretchen. I have been asked to introduce the next session. First thing I'll tell you is ignore the title of the session in your program. It's a misnomer. It actually reminds me of when my wife tells me she's going to a baby shower, which is a term I've always found very confusing because there's no shower taking place and the baby is not even there yet. But what I've come to learn over time is that in plain English, baby shower actually means drinking lots of champagne during the middle of the day. And by the way, I'll be hosting a baby shower at 5 p.m. in the bar if anyone's interested. What this next session should really be called is the IOGP Joint Industry Program, which is an avenue through which the IOGP can make additional contributions to our joint safety priorities, which is an exciting topic because I believe we're all here because we agree that safety is worthy of investment. I want to begin by thanking Steve Hawks, Chris Hawks, and Tony Cramp for all the work they've done to date to lay the foundation for the JIP within the IOGP. I think it's exciting, and I, along with all of you, interested in learning more today about where the program stands today and where it goes from here. But first, brief introductions for our two presenters today. Chris Hawks is the Director of Health, Safety, and Security for IOGP. He's a marine engineer by training and has over 30 years of industry experience. And our other presenter is Tony Cramp, well known to this audience. Tony is the Vice President of Aircraft at Shell and the Managing Director of Shell Aircraft. He spent 2 decades in the Royal Navy as a helicopter pilot and instructor, and has held various roles of responsibility at Shell since joining in 2003. So, gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Solo. Right. Is that better? I thought we were doing this solo. That's a change in program, so we'll be flexible on this one. You've had an awful lot of Brits up here this morning. We're a bit heavy on that side, so I'll point out that I'm currently a resident of Euroland, wherever that is, and I once was a resident of Texas and still hold the driving license there. So we'll try and bring a bit of diversity into the program from that point of view. I think it's also apt that having been set up by Deirdre with some fairly hard-hitting slides this morning, you now have the oil and gas guy on stage with a target firmly on his chest. And I think to that end, the information that we just need to pass over in terms of the JIP this morning is relatively brief. So what I'd like to do is then open up the rest of this session to some real questions that can be answered by or asked by the people in the audience, because certainly at our table there's an awful lot of energy over that last one, and Deirdre might want to join in with a couple of the answers on that as well. So
I thought I might just start off with explaining what a JIP is, a Joint Industry Project. So in IOGP, the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, we do a lot of funding of extraordinary work. So extraordinary work being stuff that our members want to do, want to contribute to, want to achieve without actually being part of our normal operations or our normal funding mechanisms, which is the same as HeliOffshore, just through your membership fees and so on. So whenever we have a joint industry project, the people who are interested, the companies who are interested, come together, and it's not just IOGP members. We have other interested parties who come together to form this joint industry project, which is a collaborative effort through which good works can and should happen. Now, for this particular effort, I think that we've got some great projects that HeliOffshore are trying to seek funding for, and with our joint industry project experience and with our efforts in IOGP, many of our companies want to contribute to these efforts. Tony's going to go through a little bit about what they're for, how they go through. And I think that with the JIP, with your support, with our all company member support, then we're going to apologies. We're going to get the funding that we need for these projects and probably provide proof of concept for further funding mechanisms in the future.
Thanks, Chris. Just an example of what Chris was talking about there. So there's one here that was put through IOGP some time ago, subsea well intervention, probably post-Macondo. And you can just see there that in this instance, you've got a number of the IOCs listed. So it's put out there to all the members of IOGP, those that have the interest and the commitment to go forward with that project will then subscribe to it, and the costs for that project will be shared amongst those IOC members. Separate one here on Arctic response technology, which was probably a seashell in there when we were starting to get interested in going up to the Arctic. But less said about that one at the end, the better. So what are we doing for HeliOffshore? In terms of the process, Steve and Chris introduced this back last year with the management committee. So we've got agreement in principle from the management committee of the IOC to go forward with the HeliOffshore projects as part of what is Project Saphira within the IOGP, which is basically looking at causes of deaths and accidents right across the oil and gas industry sphere, and aviation transport being one of them. So we've got that agreement in principle. Within the Aviation Safety Committee, when we had the meeting back in Atlanta, we now have broad agreement from the whole of that group to move forward with this joint industry project as well. Chris and Mariana have drafted out the document, the sharing document, and that's been put out to the aviation subcommittee members, basically so they can share it with their legal departments and gain commitment. I've already had, and it's only been out a week and a half, 2 weeks, I've already had 5 IOCs that have committed to get on board with that. I'm looking for about 15, ideally, from within that, because the more we have on board, the lower the cost for each individual member. And we certainly have at least 15 with significant offshore exposure. If we look at what we're funding, it's basically the projects you've been seeing over the last couple of days. And it's to enable the work that you've already done, that you've funded through the membership side of being with HeliOffshore, to keep momentum going on those projects. And you can see the breakdown of what we have there. So the intent is to set this process up, and it is a process. So these are the projects we're going to be looking at initially and getting funding for this year so they can continue and come to fruition over the next year. But now we've got that process in place, if there are other projects that we feel from an oil and gas side we want to contribute through some more money to at a future date, then we've then got the mechanism by which to do that. There's got to be some governance in this, so we're not just throwing money over the fence and letting it get on. So we have a governance through a steering committee or a steering team within the ASC, which is largely the ASC leadership team. And that team, which I'll be on, will be responsible for making sure that the money that comes from the IOCs is actually being spent well. So we're certainly interested in getting a bit more detail out of some of those projects and moving forward. But I have to say, from yesterday, from the briefs, it was fantastic to see the progress that a lot of those projects was making. And I think I'll canvass the rest of our members here today, but certainly from my feeling is I definitely want to get behind those and see them through, because there's a huge amount of value in there. We are going to be challenging within that, and I'd push out one challenge to Matt on the safety information program within that one. From that point, I think we see, certainly from my perspective, that we've got a fantastic tool there, we've got a lot of ability, but there's not a lot of data in there. 3 reports each month is pretty pathetic from the number of hours that are being flown around the globe by HeliOffshore members. That seems more like an info take than an info share system at the moment. So I'd just encourage, I'd challenge, if we're going to be putting our money and our time into this, and we certainly want to find the opportunity. We're doing that through the HeliDeck working group at the moment and making sure that we as oil and gas companies can provide safety information through the HeliDeck side. We'll be expecting that the membership of HeliOffshore is going to start contributing a lot more information on incidents, especially, because that's where a lot of the gold dust is, into that info share process, so we can really make a success of the HSIP project as well. Because at the moment, my feeling is it's a great project in terms of the tools there, but it's deficient on data. And if we all want to get the benefit out of that, then it needs to be fed, not just with occurrences that happen because of the aircraft, which go back to the OEM, but operational ones as well. And often a huge amount of value from those operational incidents and near misses that we could all benefit. So that's something we'll be talking with Gretchen and Matt and the team about how we can improve the incident reporting in particular. So, just to summarise on the GIP side, our priorities absolutely align. We've been part of HeliOffshore since its inception. Any help before that? HeliOffshore are a major member of the IOGP Oil and Gas, Aviation Subcommittee. We talk a lot, we agree the priorities, and we're falling behind that. We certainly all want results, just as much as you do. And we certainly see this as a way in which we can add momentum. Some of our members, Shell certainly has, and a number of the others have got individuals that are contributing to the work group, but this is probably a way in which we as the IOCs can contribute more meaningfully to make sure we're using the expertise that exists right around this group to really give them the opportunity to do some good on all our behalf.
Yeah,
okay, so that's the GIP side.
I was just going to add, I think the key to this is that this is a funding mechanism. So this is the potential to provide the way to fund future projects. And I think that as you guys and as we in IOGP come together with good ideas, with good safety initiatives, then to have this mechanism in place to fund that outside our normal activities, I think is really important. So we're looking for the IOCs to contribute, but also for the whole of the industry to contribute as well.
Thank you. The other one I just wanted to touch on, because it was a conversation we've been having for the last hour or so with the other speakers, is the state of the industry. It's something that we've been talking about internally in IOGP for some time. And Gretchen, feel free to jump in if I get anywhere close to antitrust issues within this. I'll try and stay away from that. We're committed to the provision of safe services from our point of view. And I make that distinction. We're not in the business of keeping everybody else in business. That's not what we're there to do, and those aren't the conversations that have gain a lot of headway when you're talking about the current state within the oil and gas companies. But we are committed to you as the operators, you as the OEMs, being able to provide us with safe services. And that's probably exactly the same thing. It's just coming at it from a different angle. And I'd say when we're having those engagements, when you're having those engagements with IOCs, come at it from that angle, that it's about safe and sustainable services, because that's the argument that actually works, and it's the one where you're going to get more traction than if you're just talking about financial survival. We are engaging and educating our respective supply chains, and this is where we've got to do it individually. So I'll take my IOGP hat off and put the Shell hat on. We are engaging with that. We do have the conversations, we've had them over the last 6 to 8 months, about the sort of problems that Deirdre highlighted through the supply chain principles. Those are a number of the behaviours we've been talking about as well, that we know are causing pain in the industry, and they're holding back development, they're holding back some of the recovery. So those conversations are going on. Some of us enjoy a position of quite some influence within our organisations. Other members of the ASC don't have the same sort of influence because they sit in a different part or a different level of their particular company. But they're all trying as hard as they can to get this message over. What I would emphasise, though, is it needs a consistent approach. If we're going to talk about the stress and the pain that the industry is going through and the need to do this, then we all need to be open and honest. It's no good if I'm going in at the high level of Shell and talking to the senior guys in contract procurement and the supply chain and telling them that the operators are bleeding over this, we've got safety issues, we've got razor-thin margins, and if we're not careful, we're going to have an accident as a result of that. To then have somebody from one of the operators, because they're being ultra-competitive over a tender, in a business unit, then turn around and say, hey, no safety issues here, we're perfectly happy, we'll be able to manage this contract safely, don't you worry about it, we could do it even down at this level. That just blows my credibility out of the water, and it undermines your argument on a global scale, and it's not going to help the industry as a whole. So if we are going to tackle this, we need to do it in a joined-up way. Within Shell, and again, I'm just talking now Shell, not in terms of the IOGP, we've got a lot of traction over the last 6 to 8 months in terms of just raising awareness of the senior leaders about the issue. And if you talk to the contract and procurement and the supply chain guys in terms of safety and the responsibility they have or the impact their actions can directly have on safety, they will listen. If you're talking about business continuity, which is linked to that and the ability for those services, they will listen on those. But that's just passing on the experience. That's the sort of language that I've found does give traction. So keep it away from just the pure financial side and keep it consistent so we can have a joined-up impact. And certainly one of the conversations I've been having with Gretchen and Bill this weekend is perhaps the need for that cumulative pain or some ideas, some data, some evidence of some of the stress that we can use HeliOffshore as a body to go in and talk to the IOCs at a senior level and make a very compelling argument, which doesn't mean that you individually as operators are exposing yourself perhaps to an uncomfortable situation. So just some thoughts there. As I say, I think we've got a little bit of time. If there are any questions coming from the conversations you've had earlier, and again, maybe Deirdre might want to help answer some of those as well. Fire away. Or not.
Or not. And just to build on that last point from Tony, both the management committee and the safety committee of IOGP are very engaged in this conversation. They're well aware of the issues that Tony's just been talking about. So it is a conversation within the oil companies, but as Tony says, we need your help. If operators are contracting at unsustainable rates, then there's not a lot we can do.
Question for either of you on the second point. Has there been any evidence of actual engagement there and success in moving the needle?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly, again, just talking within Shell, yes, I've had to engage on a number of areas. I'm not going to give details of which they were and where they were, but yes, they have listened because it's a lot of the time it's just that they haven't heard the argument. They don't understand the stress. They're thinking that this part of the supply chain has got the same characteristics as the drilling rigs and any other part of it. So it's a lack of awareness quite often rather than an intention. And certainly there's a lack of awareness of the long-term consequences. And I think I'll certainly be coming to Deirdre for a copy of her slides because they're going to be very powerful in terms of helping move the needle on that as well. But yes, we have had concrete examples where we've changed it.
Hey, I'm Kevin Toge representing Chevron. So Tony and Steve, thanks for explaining the JIP to the group. I think there's a lot of value going forward in the JIP. At Chevron, we're also committed to the safety. We want to make sure all the operators we're not in those stressors type environment. We've seen some similar things, Tony, with supply chain, some decisions that were made in the past in silos, so working to educate that department as well. And I think you touched on a very key point about consistent messaging. So, using HeliOffshore is a great format when we are approaching the oil companies, and we all have a consistent message, and using this body as a representation is, I think, the path forward to success.
Thanks, Kevin.